It's been 21 days since a nursing home fry cook evaded the Secret Service with all of the precision and guile of Daffy Duck outsmarting Elmer Fudd. And yet, the Federal Bureau of Ineptitude investigation has yet to conjure a modicum of motive for Thomas Crooks to have wanted former President Donald Trump dead. But that should not be surprising. It's been 61 years since a schoolbook order-taking lackey shattered the Secret Service's illusion of protection when he assassinated President John Kennedy, and the FBI is still puzzling over Lee Harvey Oswald's motive. In fact, the similarities between the assailants of JFK and DJT are numerous and unnerving. Young, idealistic men clinging to society with their fingertips, ever present but seldom participants. Men who, by intent and inevitability, were always alone in the crowd. Introverted and mentally ill, these men sought not their political or practical enemies, but public figure targets of opportunity that would provide them with a swift and inglorious exit from this mortal coil. But is that their only motivation? I am Mark Jacobin, along with my brother James, and this is Extemporaneously. James, who is the first person that comes to mind when you hear the following statement? He was polite but distant, he ate lunch alone in the break room, and rarely spoke with anyone.
Well, Mark, I thought we weren't going to talk about Lee Oswald today. It sounds vaguely familiar to Oswald eating lunch on the second floor of the Sexton Building, commonly known as the Texas School Book Depository Building. Yeah, Lee Oswald comes to mind.
Lee Oswald does come to mind. For those who haven't studied Lee Oswald as a hobby, this was a common refrain throughout the 1991 JFK movie. Now, this is an actual quote taken from people who were describing Thomas Crooks as published in the New York Times.
Well, yeah, I think all they did was take Oswald's Wikipedia page, photocopy it, change the name, and slap up good old Tom Crooks.
So now we're right into a whitewash, right? Let's make Tom Crooks into Lee Harvey Oswald. Or according to some sources I've read, his actual name was Lee Harvey Weinstein Oswald.
Really? I'm not aware of that, Mark. This new information that comes out as they release these sealed documents is fascinating. Yeah. No, in all seriousness, I don't think it takes the Federal Bureau of Investigation 20 days to figure out that there's similarities, not just with Crooks and Oswald, but with Crooks and most of prior presidential assassins, especially in the realm of mental illness, isolation, powerlessness, hopelessness. And also one thing you didn't touch on is the feeling of being invisible, Mark. Thomas Crooks was slight of build and slight of attitude, very, very passive, not aggressive at all. He internalized everything. It's why he could walk around the Butler Fairgrounds, or the Butler Horse Show Compound, or whatever it's referred to as.
The Butler Farm Show Grounds.
Butler Farm Show Grounds. My goodness. Where do they come up with these names? So, Mark.
Maybe they have a farm show there.
It's because Thomas Crooks most likely felt invisible his whole life, and indeed was. And he probably tested this out numerous times of getting away with small slights, maybe embezzling from work or stealing other people's notebooks in high school, and noticing that no one noticed. So as he walks around the fairgrounds and gets seen by numerous different law enforcement people, they don't take him as a threat, or they don't take him as seriously as they should, because no one ever does. And that also has shades and rings of Oswald. And he traded in on that day. Good old Tom Crooks with the glasses and the long hair and the slight build. Who's he going to hurt? What's he going to do? He's just a nerd. He's a video game player, right? To quote screenwriter Oliver Stone, using his superior intellect to wash dishes at a nursing home for $11.25 an hour.
Exactly. Now, to show people the symmetry between Oswald and Crooks, we have to explain to people who Lee Harvey Oswald was, at least a little bit, because there are so many misperceptions about Oswald. Most of the JFK conspiracy center on the fact that he was a self-proclaimed Marxist, had lived in the Soviet Union, not defected, as many people believe, and was permitted by both countries to return to the United States with his Russian wife and newborn child. This, of course, leads to speculation and very absurd fantasies that Oswald was an intelligence operative and perhaps a double or even triple agent. The truth, as we know it, James, is much less exciting and far more tragic. Where Thomas Crooks did enjoy at least a middle-class lifestyle with a stable family home. He grew up with both of his parents. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in New Orleans in 1939, and his father died 2 months before he was born. And due to the difficulties that one might imagine of being a single parent in the 1940s, with no welfare system, no public support systems, Oswald lived in an orphanage as a toddler, as did his brothers Robert Oswald and John Pick, a half-brother from his mother's previous marriage. By the time Oswald was 13, he was a habitual truant, diagnosed with personality pattern disturbance with schizoid features and passive-aggressive tendencies. He had spent a month in juvie and was sentenced to probation for truancy. Oswald drops out of school at 16 and again at 17, this time for good. Not exactly CIA material. Oswald spends 3 years in the Marine Corps, during which time he is court-martialed for illegal possession of a firearm and restricted from overseas duty. He leaves the Marine Corps in 1959 and proceeds to Russia, where he's granted a visa, and stays for 3 years working at a radio and television factory in Minsk, where he meets and marries Marina Prusakova. Dissatisfied with life as a comrade, Oswald and Marina arrive in the U.S. in 1962 with their daughter June. Oswald struggles with employment for the next 18 months, until one day JFK drives by Oswald's workplace in a convertible, and Oswald whacks him with a military surplus rifle. Does that about sum it up, James?
It sums it up for the most part. I would add to that when he was in the public school system in New York City for being a constant truant, and this is the early 50s, that diagnosis that you refer to is not you post-diagnosing Oswald 60 years ago. This was in the early 50s when this type of I guess, psychological examinations were in their infancy. Pardon me. He was diagnosed as that by a New York City counselor, a mental health professional, who he was sent to see after the truancy violations over and over, and was diagnosed by that person in the early 50s. And the recommendation was that he be put in a boys' home because he could not function in society. So his mother, Marguerite Oswald, and I'll quote someone in the 1960s who was batshit crazy, flees with Oswald back to New Orleans, as opposing to dealing with Oswald's diagnosed mental illness. And we're talking the 1952 diagnosis, or 53.
Right.
So
he's
want to make sure
14 years old at this point in time. And unlike all of the other would-be assassins and school shooters who were quiet and their mental problems went largely unnoticed, we have public record of the problems that Oswald was dealing with from the beginning.
Right, and also the propensity towards impulsive violence. You mentioned his stepfather, Mr. Pick. He attempted with a kitchen knife to stab the wife of his stepbrother. I'm not sure if it's the exact time period, but in that same time period. So now we've got violence at a very young age in there as well. All of this undiagnosed, untreated. Oswald, if you could say, was invisible. He fell through the cracks of the 1950s social system.
Yes, and in the 18 months leading up to the assassination, he is also physically and verbally abusive towards his wife, up to and including rape.
That's correct. And sticking with, and these are very serious accusations, Mark. These are the worst of the worst. And sticking with the invisibility theme here, FBI agent James Hosty was assigned to check in on Oswald every now and then, as someone who has returned from Russia and a disgraced Marine. And Hosty himself, more or less in his report, said Oswald's a nobody. Nobody wants this guy. He's not intelligence for Russia or anybody else. He's basically just a loser. So Hosty, who's a trained investigator, sees Oswald as invisible and a nothing and a nobody.
Yes, and another point along that storyline, the reason Oswald was allowed to leave Russia wasn't because he was some super secret spy who was working for both countries at the same time and neither country at the same time. It was because why? He was invisible. Russia looked at him and said, you know what, this guy, he brings no value to us, to the Soviet, and he brings nothing but risk. So if he wants to go back to the United States, let the United States deal with him. So his invisibility follows him wherever he goes and is a driving factor in the decisions and the movements of his life.
Yeah, and I'd make another parallel directly to Tom Crooks and Lee Oswald. When Oswald was in the Marine Corps, his Marine Corps buddies sometimes referred to him as Oswaldovich in reference to his constant Marxist rantings. Now, Mark, in the context of the late 1950s, if you're in the United States military and you're talking subversive, spewing Leninist, Marxist, communist theories, number one, you're going to get probably beat up by your coworkers there. And number two, you're not going to be allowed to be in the Marines. The reason they just made fun of him and took no action, they didn't take him seriously. Fast forward 60 years, when Thomas Crooks was a sophomore in high school at Bethel-Page High School in Pennsylvania, he emailed in a bomb threat to Bethel-Page High School saying he was going to blow up the school. Tom Crooks did this. This is an established fact. And the next day, half the kids didn't go to school because he posted this on an open message board, I think in Discord. And Thomas Crooks was not arrested, was not disciplined. No action was taken against him. And why? Because no one took him seriously. No one took Oswald seriously when he went on his rants at age 17 and 18 as a new Marine. And no one took Crooks seriously in the age of the school shooter, in the age of 10, 15, 20 kids getting blown away once every year. No one took Crooks seriously. This is a huge tell. Thomas Crooks, 6 years later, has now fallen through the cracks of the 2023 mental health system.
And Oswald and Crooks shared physical similarities. They were diminutive individuals. They were slight. They didn't weigh a lot. And although this is an age where we're not supposed to judge people based on physical appearance, people become sensitive to what they perceive as their personal failings. And they were both physically small, and especially in the 1950s. Oswald was 5'7", 150 pounds. In the Marine Corps, he was going into the Marines with a deficiency. He was just asking to be teased and beat up because he was small. So small guys in the Marines in the 1950s would have to be doing it better and faster than everybody else. And now you have him ranting about Marxism and communism and how Russians are better than everyone else. And James, it's these people walk around, and the patterns they establish in their lives, you could easily interchange Oswald with Crooks.
Exactly. And when you think about the fact that Oswald did receive Marine Corps training on the rifle range, now split screen that's Tom Crooks at Bethel-Page High School, his freshman year, attempting to try out for the rifle team. Yes, some communities have rifle teams. And it was originally misreported that Mr. Crooks made the team, but then was kicked off the team or something to that effect. The true story is when you talk to the high school rifle coach, he says, no, he showed up. And after he fired his weapon, not only did we not let him try out, we requested he not come back. Now, because something felt off about it to the rifle coach. It's not that he wasn't talented. What 15 or 16-year-old trying out for the junior varsity rifle team is talented on day one? It was his affect and demeanor he was giving off to the coach. And the coach can't name a specific thing. It was just, I don't want this guy around other kids with a loaded rifle.
That's a little spooky.
That is spooky. So you kind of have the same thing, relatively at the same ages in the organizations they're a member of. The Marine Corps, high school, they're not exact comps, but they're comparable.
And
right?
well, Oswald was a member of the Civil Air Corps at the same age, or Civil Air Patrol.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. You're exactly right. So there's this sense of wanting to fit in, right? But also wanting to fit in a certain way. The Civil Air Patrol, the Rifle Club, right? These structured organizations where young men and women can get discipline and a sense of belonging. And as we do know, with men of a certain age or teenage boys of a certain age, what makes them feel powerful? What makes them feel good? Guns. And Oswald had the Marines, and Tom Crooks had the video game with Fortnite, the first-person shooter games.
Oswald, while he was stationed in Japan, illegally obtained a revolver, accidentally shot himself in the arm, and that led to his court-martial.
Correct. He was also given a separate Article 32 for either attempting to or slugging a superior. I think it was a sergeant. So that impulsive violence, right, that shows up briefly, right, and then just goes away as the Oswalds of the world or the Tom Crooks of the world put back on that cloak of invisibility because the mask has come off. And they're like, okay, to succeed in society, I cannot let this be seen. So I have to come off as quiet and quirky and nerdy and don't be aggressive and take the verbal abuse, because they themselves know that their response to even slight insults would be strict, ferocious violence. But they know on some level they can't do that until they do.
And so they constantly internalize. There's one anecdote where when Oswald was fired from the photography firm where he worked, which he really enjoyed the work, unfortunately he wasn't very good at it. His boss came to him and said, "Sorry, Lee, I got to let you go." And Lee said, "Thank you very much," and left. You would expect someone with Lee's personality to get excited, maybe violent, shout, or at least complain that he was being persecuted. But no, his first response in those situations is to internalize it and move. And then that internalizing compresses and feeds into their dysfunctions until finally they act out in a very aggressive and unfortunately fatal way.
Correct. So the impulsive violence turns into... Can we talk about premeditation at this point for Oswald and Crooks, Mark?
Oh, certainly.
Just briefly. We know Oswald premeditated the killing of a high official for possibly years, but we definitely know for at least a year, because prior to shooting the president and Officer Tippit, he attempted to kill former General or retired General Walker in what was then an unsolved crime, right? So from that point to 6-7 months later when he kills the president, he's plotting and formulating to kill someone at some point. Walker was a victim of opportunity, right? So was Kennedy. Crooks, we know, for about a year and a half, was ordering these bomb-making materials online. But he didn't order them all at once. He ordered this or that, and they got 18 packages to his house, his parents' house. And his parents weren't suspicious because he was a chemistry kid. He was awarded a $500 scholarship for math and sciences. That's how good he was. And these are exclusive scholarships. And so he was premeditating to blow something up. And given the fact that we know he was thinking about blowing his school up, and then in the weeks prior, according to the FBI's Google search of Crooks's laptop at his parents' home, he was Googling phrases such as Democratic National Convention 2024, Joe Biden's travel schedule, Donald Trump's campaign appearances. And the day before he would attempt to shoot the former president, or indeed did shoot the former president, he Googled, how far was Oswald from Kennedy? So the premeditation here is built in over years.
Yes. Oswald had been planning to assassinate somebody from at least January of 1963. In between Edwin Walker and Kennedy, there was a second attempt, but Marina ended up talking him out of it. He took his revolver and was going to go see a public figure. Now, there's some question about whether this was Nixon, who never actually visited Dallas, or possibly Johnson, Vice President Johnson at the time. But that episode happened. He took his gun and was going to go see somebody, and Marina eventually got him to not go.
Correct, because Marina was Lee's one connection to the real world. Because although Oswald could be diagnosed as having multiple disorders, even if you're a person who lacks empathy or has none at all biologically, you still have feelings. And Oswald had feelings for his wife. So she was able to, in her own way, through the affection she had for him, talk him down, if you will.
And by this point in time, Marina is an accomplice. She knows about the attempt on Edwin Walker. She has hidden the evidence that proves that Oswald attempted to shoot Walker. But at the same time, she's trying to support him in such a way that he has an outlet, but he's not going around murdering people.
Well, because she's like so many people that are in severely abusive domestic relationships, Mark. Add on top of that she's got infant children, and on top of that, she doesn't speak the language, and this is the Cold War. So,
and on top of that, in Soviet society, it's us against the world. Husband and wife is the highest form of commitment, and it's generally husband and wife against the state. And Marina had no reason to trust the state of America any more than she trusted the USSR.
That's correct, Mark. And the audience at this point may be asking themselves, well, the name of this show is The Motive, and we're talking about Thomas Crooks and the fact that he almost killed Donald Trump. Why are we spending so much time on Oswald?
Because most people don't know enough about Oswald to understand the comparison. Most people are under the impression that Oswald was or may have been some kind of intelligence operative, and that was his motive, that he was simply acting on orders. And the truth of the matter is that Oswald is a carbon copy of Thomas Crooks in many ways. Not in all ways, but enough ways, psychological ways. Socially, his social experiences mirrored those of Thomas Crooks. And so people can go out now and read about Thomas Crooks, and most of the information out there is relatively accurate. The conspiracy nuts haven't distorted it to the point where you can't recognize Thomas Crooks anymore. And so it's important for us to give people both pictures, and I think we need to spend a little bit more time talking about Oswald, because Thomas Crooks, there's not a whole lot to know about him. He didn't go traveling around the world. He wasn't in the Marines in Russia and Mexico City and New Orleans and Dallas. Trying to track Oswald's movements over a course of 4 years is difficult. Thomas Crooks grew up in the same town. He went to school in the same town. He lived in the same town. He went to school in the same town. He didn't lead an exciting life as compared to Lee Harvey Oswald.
But much as Lee Oswald, he led a very exciting life in his head. The murderistic dreams of grandeur. The other comparison when you talk Oswald and Crooks is this one. And I should have mentioned this at the top of the show. They're both murderers, Mark. They're both murderers of innocent people. Obviously, presidents are innocent, but there's many reasons why someone would want to kill a president. Oswald killed an innocent police officer. Tom Crooks killed an innocent retired firefighter chief. They care not who they hurt. Right? They just want the Wikipedia page, and Thomas Crooks now has one.
Yes. Yeah. While we're looking at them, while we're studying them from an academic and psychological perspective, we can't overlook the real world impact of their illnesses, which is people are dead because these other people lived.
Exactly. Because the focus, when you attempt to kill a president, that's all the main subject of conversation is going to be, because of the importance of that, of trying to kill the chief executive or killing the chief executive. So when someone else dies in those circumstances, it tends not to get the attention it would get if Thomas Crooks just went out and murdered Corey Compantore. Well, that's a big deal. Right? If Oswald just murders J.D. Tippit, that's a big deal. But if you murder him in the same context in the same day where a president dies or gets shot in the face, it gets much less attention. The other thing here that is relevant to me in 2024, Mark, what is August 3rd, 2024, is for the longest time, I had said to people when they'd asked me about Oswald, I said, look, if Oswald was alive today, he'd be our contemporary. He'd be 84 years old, the same age as Nancy Pelosi. He's younger than Clint Eastwood, but he's dead, obviously. If he was a teenager today, I often said he would be a school shooter, because school shooting wasn't a thing back then. Assassinations were, but school shooting wasn't. And we know that Thomas Crooks would have been a mass murderer, irregardless of what happened on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania, because he was also Googling in the prior weeks a school shooter from, I believe, Illinois from a couple years ago who recently got sentenced, because he wants to be that. He wants to be someone who gains attention, fame, notoriety, and a sense of overwhelming power by committing murder in a way to where he'd be headline news. So if it wasn't Trump on July 13th, it would have been somebody. And most likely, it would have been Bethel-Page High School.
So let's talk about the motive. Why did Thomas Crooks intend to kill Donald Trump on July 13th, 2024?
Well, Mark, we're exactly 3 weeks, we're 21 days since the incident of the attempted assassination on Trump. And FBI Director Christopher Wray has been investigating this because attempting to murder a former chief executive is a federal offense, unlike 1963, where it was famously called a local crime. So the FBI is investigating this event, and they're also investigating the Secret Service. So Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, getting grilled by the Oversight Committee last week, says, and I quote, "We're not the Federal Bureau of Protection. We're the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Okay, fair enough, Mr. Investigator, Chief Investigator for America. What's the motive? Well, we haven't established that yet. We're having a real hard time getting a fix on who this young man was. And I say to myself, really? You make $400,000 a year. You yourself have a 16-person protection team and a 3-car caravan that takes you home every night. And you can't surmise, with all of your experience and investigative skill in the post-September 11th era, you cannot conceive of a motive. I find that truly remarkable. Here's the motive, Mark. Because we live in an age where people are so not uninformed, but they're tricked when they watch movies and TV shows. You got to have motive, means, and opportunity to convict someone of murder. That's completely not true.
Nope, you just need evidence and a really good prosecutor.
Right, you just need to prove that that person killed another human being. Now, it's been written by former prosecutors, so I'll just quote them here. It is not legally compelling to present to the jury or to the general public a motive for a killing, but you have a moral obligation to do so if you have one. This is why prosecutors present motive, because a jury can easily see, oh, this guy ripped off his business partner, so the other guy killed him. That's a motive. So the layman brain can be like, okay, that's why he did it, but it's not a necessary component to establish guilt. The motive here, Mark, is that Tom Crooks is 60 years on, or 2.5 generations from the killing of Kennedy. Tom Crooks went to the University of Oswald Assassination School. I would say he's a direct descendant. He's the grandson of the Oswald mindset of assassination, self-aggrandizement, and attempting to kill the most well-known person in the world so you can forever have your name tied to that person. You can have your own Wikipedia page. You never again will mention Donald Trump without mentioning Tom Crooks. You'll never again mention John Kennedy without mentioning Lee Oswald. So these people of great acclaim, great stature, right, are now side by side with someone who's never accomplished anything in their life, failed at everything they tried to do, and was overlooked by society for their personal, physical, and mental shortcomings, and deemed non-threatening. Now, the motive here is simple, and you don't need to be the FBI director to figure it out. You don't need to have gone to, Psych Ops 101. Tom Crooks tried to kill Donald Trump because he wanted to take over for Oswald as the greatest assassin in American history. Period. And to that extent, Tom Crooks succeeded. And we know this because Tom Crooks is the second most Google search person in America right now. The motive was to achieve exactly what has happened. He just didn't go to the figurative Lee Harvey Oswald school of assassination and murder and self-fame. At Bethel-Page High School, I watched an interview with one of his classmates. I forget her name. She's a female. His freshman or sophomore year, she was in class with Crooks, liked him, nice kid, really smart. She was in his group. The class was the Kennedys and the killing of John Kennedy. And they studied, I believe for an entire quarter, meaning several weeks, the Oswald assassination of Kennedy. And I believe a subset assignment within that was to study all the different ways and present your own theory on how the assassination went down. So Tom Crooks has been thinking about killing a president for 4 years, since he took that class in high school. And I guarantee you, if the Federal Bureau of Ineptitude would speak to his classmates, get that paper, talk to the teacher, search his computer, they're going to find that Tom Crooks probably had an overly hot interest in finding out how Oswald killed Kennedy, and then immediately started to think about how he could top it. You ask for a motive, Mark. I think there it is.
Thomas Crooks was at least inspired or looked to Lee Harvey Oswald as a model, or one of the models, which he used to craft his own approach to assassinating a well-known, globally known, and perhaps one of the most impactful individuals in the world today, Donald Trump.
Lee Oswald, still the GOAT.
Still the GOAT. We've been speaking extemporaneously.